As he neared the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. Dancing seems to be a lost art, certainly an activity that doesn't take place perhaps far enough too often. Dancing, something that our older generations did practically every week. Why, when I get together with families to plan the funerals of elderly loved ones who have died, one of the things that they talk about that their parents did over and over again was they loved to dance. They would go out and they would dance. Friday night, Saturday night, it was a weekly ritual. People loved back then to go dancing. Not so much today, although there's hope. Why is there hope? Well, there's hope amongst our children. How do I know that? Well, because here on Wednesday nights, if you spend any time in the gathering space at all, as the children are either coming or they're leaving, little kids will participate in what I've been told is called the floss dance. Have you seen it? Children, of course, they love the floss dance. And of course, they've tried to teach me, but this body doesn't move like that any longer. So there's hope. There's hope that maybe the younger ones can teach us middle-aged folk the importance that our elderly generations knew. It's good to dance. When he heard, as he was nearing the house, the sound of music and dancing, he refused to go in. He was angry. And you and I get it. We understand it. And we relate to that son. Because you and I are dutiful people. We do things because it's the right thing to do, and it's our duty to do it. Just like that older son did. And so, as familiar as the story of the prodigal father or prodigal son, whatever you want to call it, is, as familiar as it is to all of us, as powerful as it still is for us to hear this story over and over again, what we oftentimes don't realize is that in this story, Luke beautifully crafts it as such that he wants us to understand that both sons are lost. Both are dead. Both need to be found. Both need to be welcomed back. Both need to be given another chance. The first son, because he possessed freedom. Freedom to choose what he wanted to do. Freedom to go ask his dad for his half of the inheritance. Freedom to go off and to squander it on dissipate living. Freedom to be able to finally come to his senses that he needed to come back to the Father, even to be a hired worker. Why? Because he was starving to death. The first son possessed freedom. And he realized that gift, in and of itself, simply led him to a life of isolation and hunger and loneliness. And then the second son, he possessed the gift of duty. Duty, do the right thing, obey, follow the commandments, do the right thing. But duty, as important as that gift is, why, in and of itself, led the older son, the other son, to also a life of isolation, to a life of anger, to a life of resentment. Because, my friends, the gospel parable today teaches us that as important as freedom and duty are, if they become an end in and of themselves, they will lead down the path that led the two sons down the path of being lost and nearly dead. because freedom and duty have a higher purpose. And that purpose is always love. You see, that's what the father in today's parable possessed. He too had the gift of freedom. He freely chose to give both sons each of their half of the inheritance, while the dad chose to go bankrupt in giving all that he had, half to one, half to the other. He freely chose to do that. Didn't even ask a question. And then he freely, why Luke tells us, he freely, by running out to greet his son who is still a long ways off, he freely did that. And also out of duty, the father came out and spoke to his other son who refused to come into the house. But what the father possessed that neither of the sons did was love. You see, that's what the father had, a love for his two sons that enabled him to see that both freedom and duty serve a higher purpose, and that is love. Now, last weekend, I was introduced to you the ill-taught piano student. And the ill-taught piano student, of course, is somebody who is so consumed and worried about, making the next flub up, and that it's going to get them into trouble, that they're only worried about playing the right notes. And in playing the right notes, of course, they don't hear the music. They don't hear the music of what they're actually playing. This Sunday, we're invited to reflect upon the ill-taught disciple. And the ill-taught disciple is one like the older son who hears the music but refuses to participate in the dancing. You see, that's the next step. It's one thing to hear the music. It's one thing for you and I to hear, as we did this particular weekend, hearing the story of the prodigal son. It's one thing for you and I to hear the message of a God who loves us so much that the only thing we have to do is to turn around. We don't have to go any further. We just have to turn around from our sinful ways, and God is watching us and waiting for us, and while we're still a long ways off, divine love will come and get us. Divine grace will be poured out into us, and that we can hear. That's music to our ears. But then the next step, the step that both sons had to take in today's gospel parable, is they had to be willing to come into the house and to join in the dancing. That means that you and I not only need to hear this message of reconciliation, of forgiveness, of redemption, of second chances, of being found when we get lost, of being resuscitated when we think we're near dead. Why, this is one thing to hear this message, but it's a whole nother thing to recognize that this divine love and this divine grace that is given to you and I again tonight in this sacrament invites you and I to not just as we near the house to hear the music and dancing, but it invites you and I to come in. And God puts a robe on our shoulders, and he puts a ring on our fingers, and he puts sandals on our feet, and he gives us this incredible divine love embrace. And he welcomes us home. And anytime we are welcomed home, why, there's rejoicing. And rejoicing always gets us dancing.